we'll work away here. Everybody, so very welcome this evening. It's kind of a sunny-ish evening here in Ireland, and I'm sure we've a couple of different people joining us, including our speaker this evening from across the globe. Very, very delighted to have you here. I see some regular faces and I see some new faces. So lovely, lovely to have you. For anybody that is kind of new to us, just to give you a quick overview, Grow Remote, we started as a community project in 2018 with the idea of helping people to learn about remote working, to really make it local, because we knew that there was just this bit of a disconnect between what was happening out there in industry and what people knew about at a local level. Jump forward to now, we're an award-winning nonprofit. What a journey it's been. Last year got deep into training. And one of the big things for us is creating community around remote work. So whether that's somebody who's currently remote working, that you have that sense of community and people to like share ideas with, have a coffee, because isolation is the biggest challenge for remote workers. And then also for those who are on the remote working journey, that you have a group that you can come into and ask questions. One of the big things for us in Grow Remote, and I mean this, and many of you who've met me already know I mean this from the bottom of my heart, there is no such thing as a silly question. The first time I heard terms like synchronous and asynchronous, I was like, what? I just went and Googled it. So if you feel like I don't know what's going on, or please no, come ask us. That's what we're about. We meet for a virtual coffee every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Irish time. We have chapters all across Ireland and the globe. We have events like this happening, and we are so very lucky to have amazing speakers like Rhiannon Payne coming along and sharing her knowledge and wisdom. So I'm going to hand over to this absolutely fantastic author who is highlighting what can happen in remote work for people. And Rhiannon, just so delighted to have you here. Thanks so much for coming and sharing what you know and what you've learned along the way.
Yeah, I have a cat here, obviously. Thank you guys so much for having me. He gets in the way of every Zoom call. I'm sure anyone with pets or kids is, working from home, very familiar with that problem at this point. But yeah, thank you so much, Rose, for having me. I really enjoyed connecting with you at the beginning of this year and learning more about Grow Remote and, everything you guys are doing in Ireland and globally. One of the things that I talked about in my book is how remote work is really creating this more equal playing ground for people. I live in San Francisco, California, which is, has been up to this point sort of like the heart of technology and startups. But, you're really seeing that changing, particularly within the past year, with a lot of people leaving the Bay Area, leaving New York, leaving big cities like Dublin or London. And finding more comfortable places to live, sometimes in more rural communities or even in other countries, and creating lives that really work better for them as people, as opposed to creating lives structured around the wants and needs of their employers. So yeah, I very much resonate with your mission, and again, super happy to be here and answer some questions from you guys. Just to give you like a little bit of an introduction to me and my experience as a remote worker. I've been working remotely since 2012, leading distributed teams all over the world, and have been full-time remote since 2015 now. So I actually had the idea for my book, which I have a copy right here, The Remote Work Era. I started writing this in 2018 after a talk that I did on remote distributed team leadership in Amsterdam. And I was really inspired by all of the research that I was doing for that talk, and wanted to sort of create a comprehensive guidebook that would answer questions that people have about going remote, successfully working remotely, leading remote teams, becoming freelancers and consultants online, and things like that. So, when COVID hit last year, I really just buckled down and like committed myself to this mission of, interviewing over 100 remote work leaders globally, and compiling their insights and stories alongside my own story in the book, and creating these frameworks that anyone can follow to find more freedom and flexibility in their lives. So it was an amazing experience to write and publish it and connect with so many people along the way. And super excited to answer your guys' questions about, how to go remote, or, once you're working remotely, how to sort of build on your career, like whether, you're a freelancer or working at a company, or whether you're an entrepreneur. Any questions you might have about how to really thrive and sort of create more fulfilling lifestyles around remote work, I'd love to answer.
If anybody wants to unmute themselves to ask a question, or you can use the chat function as well. So have we any takers there at the moment? And maybe as the audience, because we had a couple of people posting in questions ahead of time, Rhiannon. One of the questions was, what advice you would give to somebody who's early in their remote career, or maybe hasn't held a remote job before? What would you kind of say to them that would help them on their way?
Absolutely. And that's actually a lot of people in my community. I run a kind of small private group on Facebook for women remote workers, many of whom are just getting started or sort of aspire toward that lifestyle, who, maybe have never had any kind of digital job before, or feel like they don't have digital skills. And the first thing that I really recommend is really understanding like what kind of remote career you want. Like, I think it's all well and good to know that you want to work flexibly, to know that you want to work from home or work from anywhere, but what does that really look like in your ideal world? Do you want the stability of a 9-to-5 job that just happens to be remote, where you're still getting, a regular monthly paycheck and a salary and benefits? Or do you want even more flexibility, where you're, running your own business, you're freelancing and consulting and working with various clients, which, can have more upside potential and be more flexible, but, also, you're sacrificing a little bit of stability there? Or do you even want to take that a step further and, create your own product and have like a product-based business online? I really see that as the three paths to working remotely. And I think it's important to start out by considering, what appeals to you most. And then from there, and getting an understanding of like, how do your existing skills and experience, how can you connect those experiences to a remote job? If you have a lot of experience working in customer service, for example, you can always explore, what it takes to become a virtual assistant, or something along those lines, where, you're using those skills that you've cultivated, interfacing with people day to day and helping them solve their problems. And, you're just taking those experiences and putting them online. And then I think there's also, oftentimes there's a process of reskilling or upskilling that's involved for people who are just getting started. So, if you can sort of identify a field that you're interested in, or a path you want to go down, it's the next step is really, finding mentors who you can sort of talk to and rely on, who are already doing something similar to what you want to do, asking people questions, and then, finding courses, finding books, finding resources out there that can sort of help you get that foundational knowledge that you can start building on to make this career transition and be a successful remote worker.
I think that advice of mentors is huge, and I wouldn't have been maybe so aware of how keen people are to help up until the last couple of years. Yeah, and people are so generous. Obviously, it depends on people's capacity and time, but where they can give some time and they can see you're interested, people are delighted. Like, I got great help from a couple of different mentors in a few different capacities over the last few years, and it helps so very much. And I think that it's so interesting about you're saying about, somebody who might have experience in customer service. This is one of the things we've talked about a lot this year, is transferable skills. And even as I'm learning alongside the rest of the community, you don't realize how much you have in transferable skills. Renata Coleman, who's involved with us in Grow Remote, talked about how when she was in her role with Wayfair, if they saw people who came from say a retail background or hospitality background, they were delighted to see those people coming into customer service roles, because they're used to dealing with customers, and you're used to dealing with communication and maybe difficult situations, and you've already got that stuff down. So, you know, don't necessarily think that because it was in a bricks and mortar, it's not going to transfer. Um, Rhiannon, as far as the upskilling piece, is there stuff in particular that you're seeing that's been very helpful to get those earlier stage people into a remote career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is sort of dependent on what sorts of fields or careers you're interested in pursuing, right? You know, if you're interested in going more of the tech route, you want to maybe be an engineer, there's great free resources out there, like Treehouse, and I believe it's called Free Code Camp. I actually listed some of these resources out in my book. And if you're interested in, you know, pursuing something along the lines of digital marketing, HubSpot Academy is another amazing free resource. You know, they have really great courses on everything from SEO to content marketing to email marketing to lead generation. And these are things that are more entry level, that will really give you like the basics. And again, that foundational knowledge that then you can start building on. What I see a lot of people doing when it comes to upskilling is, you know, starting by, you know, finding mentors that they can, you know, talk to and ask questions, you know, taking some of these beginner courses, and then taking on small projects, whether it's, you know, their own project, like a passion project of sorts that, or something they want to do as a proof of concept, or, you know, taking on like a friend or a family member as a first client, in order to sort of practice those skills, and learn from that experience, and also gain a portfolio piece from that. And from there, you know, it's just a matter of building on that momentum, you know, continuing to learn as you grow and take on more and more projects. And then, you know, if you are interested in going the freelance route, it's a matter of, you know, sort of like incrementally increasing your pricing as you go and as you gain more experience. So, you know, that is a pretty common path for beginning remote workers to go down.
I love what you're saying about the project pieces as well, because, and again, you know, somebody says that to you, but until you experience, you don't necessarily realize how much your confidence and your skills grow. And so before Grow Remote, I was heading down the route of search engine optimization, SEO. And as I started, it was actually, I had been lucky enough to spot somebody who was offering mentorship in that space, a woman based in the UK. And just a very quick phone call with her pointed me so much in the right direction. And then from that, her advice was start to do some projects, start to build up that experience, and then you have stuff to showcase on your LinkedIn. So then when potential employers are looking up, so I suppose that's a big focus for us, is around the employment piece. Employers are looking up, they've seen that you've actually done something tangible that they can really say that person is going to be a fit for this particular role, which I think is just fantastic. Something I'm interested in as well, Rhiannon, is, are you seeing any particular challenges coming up for people, particularly at that early stage, specifically getting into remote? Any particular challenges, and would you like, you know, any particular pieces of advice you might have around there? Is it there's mindset stuff at play? Is it more about the skills, or is it just a mix of all?
I'd say it's a mix of all. I mean, I think mindset is really a key piece there. And, you know, it really ties back into what we were talking about in regards to finding mentors. There was a woman, Marianne Snow, who I interviewed for my book, who runs a large remote consultancy called Sophia. And one of the things she said when I was speaking to her that really stood out, and that just I will never forget, it was something along the lines of, you know, no one is waiting for any of us to arrive. No one's just going to open the door for us. We have to, you know, be confident and be persistent and reach out to people and make those connections, and open those doors for ourselves. And that means, you know, using these incredible networking tools that we all have at our disposal, LinkedIn, Twitter. You know, if there's someone you follow and you really admire who has, you know, a blue check next to their name and 400,000 followers, and you think they would never, give you the time of day, you don't know until you try. There have been times earlier in my career where I have, just Twitter DM'd or LinkedIn messaged those people who, are just truly leaders in their industries, and had really favorable responses. And we all have these tools at our disposal where we can connect with these top people, or even just people who are, a little more low key, but just doing amazing things in their industries. And it's on us to, make those connections, introduce ourselves, and try and bring those people into our orbits to become mentors, and, potentially they could be people who could introduce you to your next opportunity. And I think a lot of what people struggle with, especially early on, is the confidence to reach out to those people. And if you can cultivate that confidence and make those connections, that will be invaluable to you in your journey.
I can't like that or reiterate that enough, because I've lived it, and so many of the people I'm meeting have lived that as well. I love that, like, a lot of our other speakers have come in and told the stories of how they have eventually landed in these really amazing roles with some of the, the top remote working companies in the world. But it wasn't a straight line. And they started, and they made mistakes, and it took so many applications, and it took learning, and it took, all of that stuff along the way. But say for me now in the community management space, I'm speaking to, like, I'm actually being mentored by the guy who set up the PlayStation community. And like, that kind of blows my mind a little bit right now. And this
Amazing.
guy's just, yeah, he's been so generous with his, like, okay, it's set amount of time, and there's boundaries around it, and I have work to do to prepare for it. But I definitely, I will say, do exactly that. Do reach out to your networks and whatnot. Sarah, thanks so much for asking. Sarah has a question here. Have you noticed a big difference between companies forced to go remote in the last year and companies that started remote, especially in how they value remote workers?
Yeah, absolutely. I have. And, I've been consulting for the past 5 years now with, probably upwards of 20 tech startups within those 5 years. And specifically since April of 2020, I've been working with a lot of companies who are going remote for the first time because of the pandemic. And there is absolutely a difference in how a lot of newly remote companies value people's time and people's talents. And I think it comes down to, what processes do those companies have internally for remote workers? What frameworks and structures are in place? Most of these companies at this point are still trying to replicate the office experience, within the bounds of a remote work environment with Slack and Zoom meetings. And, oftentimes what that looks like is the expectation that people are supposed to be online, from 9 to 5 or even earlier or later than that. That every conversation has to be a video call in order to resolve something. And at the end of the day, if you're not giving your remote employees flexibility, you're not truly valuing them as workers or as humans. Because the beauty of remote work is that, we have the ability to have more flexible lives. But it's really on leadership and managers within companies to allow that to be true. And at the end of the day, it's the companies that are okay with their workers working asynchronously, that don't force every conversation to be a video call, that are going to get ahead in this new era of work, because the best talent is going to want to work for those companies, because people have now tasted what it feels like to have a little bit more flexibility. And people are not going to want to give that up. People want to, you know, continue to build lives that center them, that, you know, work around their schedules of picking up their kids and, you know, their daily workout routine and things that are like personally meaningful in their lives. You know, not just their work, which a lot of the times, if you're coding or writing or designing something, that can be done, you know, at any time of day. It doesn't have to happen from 9 to 5. So I hope that sort of answers your question. There's also sort of a longer conversation in there too about, you know, now that a lot of teams are distributed, you know, what companies are going to do in terms of salaries for people that aren't in big cities versus in more rural communities. And, you know, this is, I guess, still like a bit of a controversial conversation on social media that's happening in the remote work community. But I'm a firm believer that, you know, if you're paying someone $150,000 a year to work in San Francisco, it shouldn't matter if, you know, they move to Idaho. So
That is definitely a controversial and nuanced topic, and something I have to say, I would generally prefer you get paid for the work you do. But I do know that there is a certain amount of unintended consequences around local economies as well. And I think Buffer had a very interesting where they have an equation that they use to actually calculate out. So it's experience, it's, you know, it's loads of different pieces. So that if anybody's interested in looking deeper into that whole piece around salaries, I think Buffer's approach is really, really cool. I love what you're saying there, Rhiannon, as well about like the flexibility. And obviously there are certain roles in certain companies that, you know, are time constrained, especially if you're doing customer service, you might have to do it for certain time zones. But there are so many others that there could be flexibility. And like you say, for some companies that are new to remote, they haven't quite got there yet. They don't have the process in place. We have a really interesting talk actually from a lady called Jennifer Dowling, who's an organizational psychologist, and she talks about energy management versus time management. So that's one of the great things about the flexibility of remote working. If you have a role that has that flexibility, that if you're the kind of person that works better early morning and, you know, you need a break in the middle of the day to go for a run, that can be done. So I think that that's really key. And just something that comes to me as well, because this is advice that we've been given, you know, through people who have, you know, gotten so far in their remote careers, or people who are in HR and remote. Often what they will say is, if you're very new to remote, you are mostly better off to find an organization that has a good remote working structure in place already, that maybe has some experience or else has been very intentional about it. Because you don't want to both be learning together, because that's where things can go really wrong. Whereas when you're more experienced in your role, maybe then you can go into an organization that isn't as experienced. So it's just something to maybe bear in mind.
exactly. And one thing that I have seen, you know, is, you know, in trying to translate the office experience to the remote experience, companies are really burning people out, you know, because I think a lot of people have found that they've been required to be on more meetings than they were previously. You know, there's more micromanagement going on. There's more, you know, getting together on calls because you know, oftentimes people feel a little lost, not being able to connect with people in person. Maybe they haven't cultivated those strong written communication skills yet that are necessary for remote working. And by nature of that, if you're, you know, requiring someone be on 5 hours of calls a day, they still need time to, you know, do that deep work and actually, you know, output and you know, deliver on the things that, you know, you're asking them to do, whether that's, you know, coding something or writing something or whatever. So, you know, if you're putting people on phone calls all day, they're going to be working into the evening oftentimes to actually do the work that, you know, is required of them. So I think it's really important that companies start to understand this and value their employees and their time more by switching to more of an asynchronous communication model.
Absolutely. And like, understandably difficult. I got to speak to some of the leaders doing a remote leader training course, and they're very concerned about what's happening for their teams, but they need the space and time as well to build out those processes. Eddie has a question. Thanks so much, Eddie. He says, I ended up working remotely before the pandemic happening after taking a role with an IT consulting company. And what I found with project work is it's hard to switch off, as by the nature of project work, there's a large ebb and flow, and therefore it's keep standard working day. and have others found the same?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. And, I've definitely experienced that myself with consulting. There'll be some days where it's very relaxed and I can, kind of take a walk to the beach or hang out. And there are other days where it just seems like there are, a million different things to do and context switching between, many different projects, which can be super draining and overwhelming. So, I think if you're consulting, there's a little bit of ebb and flow just in the nature of doing that kind of work. But to your point, Rose, like you just said in the chat, boundaries is so important. Restricting certain, time windows throughout your day, where from 12 to 2, you take lunch and take a walk and you don't take any calls, you don't look at your email. Doing things like that is so important. Having set working hours, if that works for you, whether your working hours are 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and then, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. If that's like, blocks of time that, where you work most successfully, figuring out, when those times are and sort of structuring your days around that, I think is really important. And then again, if you're consulting, being crystal clear with your clients, on your communication practices and standards, being very clear from the beginning you onboard them as to when you will and won't accept or respond to calls or emails. I think can make a big difference, because if a client thinks they can reach you and get a response, any time of day, any day of the week, they oftentimes will push those boundaries. So having, those things clearly communicated from the beginning of the working relationship is super important.
And the same goes for a remote team. Now, again, those experienced companies in remote have stuff like that in place already. HubSpot would use something, I think they call it their communication charter, ways I like to work. And it's a conversation then between your line manager and yourself and within the team more widely about, things like, I'm going to do deep work on a Thursday, so please don't send me DMs on Slack or whatever that be, or else I will be away from Slack for that period of time. So it's that, sometimes it's just having that conversation that that you're outlining what's going to work for you. Obviously there's give and take, but often that's just it. It's about being deliberate and about starting some kind of, open dialogue around what is working for you. And not all of us know what that is until we hit there. But again, a good manager, good team will help you actually figure that out, which is a big thing. And again, on that, if you're not sure about some of this stuff, companies like GitLab have all of that they've learned about remote working in a handbook there for all of us to go and read. Now it's seriously in depth. But if you want to learn a bit more about what other companies are doing, not that that's what you need to do in your team, but it may just give you some sense of what's possible and what might work. And you can learn from other companies and other people, come in, ask people within the community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Another, actually on that point, like with GitLab, remote.com does a really good job of that as well. They have a publicly available employee guidebook on their website. So if you go to remote.com and sort of scroll to their bottom nav, you can find that and download it. And it's, really in-depth, sort of details and frameworks on how they run their remote teams, which is, I think, really good inspiration for any managers out there who are leading people remotely.
And I think really good for employees as well to educate ourselves on what is good and what isn't. Eddie's just commented again to say that the client isn't always understanding. Eddie, come to virtual coffee on Tuesday at 3 o'clock and we'll talk about it, because I'm sure there are battle stories to be shared. And sometimes, what do they say? A problem shared is a problem halved. And you never know, there's some very smart people in those calls as well, what kind of solutions might be come up with.
Exactly.
Thanks so much for that.
It's interesting.
Any other questions coming in? Sorry, Rhiannon.
Oh yeah, no worries. I was just going to say, Eddie, to that point, there's this old adage, you teach people how to treat you. So I think that goes back to being very clear from the beginning of your relationship with any client, especially when it's remote, on, you know, setting the standards and defining your own policies for how you work, and what kind of, you know, communication you'll accept. And if a client falls out of line, you can sort of direct them back to that original document or conversation.
It's just a whole load of fun, isn't it? Expectation setting,
Exactly.
clear asks, all of the above. And again, we have, you know, we've just learned so much again from, you know, these amazing companies coming in, and even companies who are in the midst of figuring out what works for them within their teams. The open and honest conversations that they've had with us in Grow Remote around how they got it wrong at the start. One company who was hybrid and used to have a number of people in office all on the one video call. And then they realized and learned from other companies that if you're doing hybrid and there's a number of people at home and a number of people in office, everybody needs to be on an individual computer as if everyone's at home. And learning that from people coming in is great. Joanne, did you want to hop in with a question there?
Yeah, hi Rose, how's it going? I did have a question, and actually you just segued very nicely to my question, which was about hybrid. I just wanted to ask about the fact that going forward there's going to be a lot of companies doing a hybrid model, which means you're going to have some employees who are at home and can really enjoy the flexibility that you talked about, like especially things like structuring your day, start at 7, you know, take 2 hours to walk the dog and all of that good stuff. But then you also have employees who are going to be in the office who may not be able to enjoy the same structure because they're, you know, in the traditional office setting. So I just wondering if Rhiannon had any advice for companies on that complexity and how to manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I obviously we're going to start seeing a lot more of experimentation in hybrid work as, you know, the vaccine rollout continues to progress and people start to go back to offices. I think it's going to be a big challenge for people. I worked in a hybrid environment in my first remote job. The company was based in Las Vegas and had an office there, but they also had a distributed team across the US, which made up about 40% of their team. And a lot of their senior team were actually remote and not in office. And from the perspective of an employee, it's a challenge. Because when there are some people that are getting that FaceTime every day and that opportunity to go out to drinks with the CEO after work, and have those off the cuff conversations, and then there are employees who aren't getting those opportunities, it's difficult to advance because, you know, the CEO and the company leaders are more likely to pull people for advancement who they feel like they know better on a personal level. And if, you know, typically those are the people that they're seeing every day, and connecting with in that way. And I don't know if I have a clear answer. One thing I think the CEO of that company did really well was she flew us out to the home office in Vegas a lot. So I went out there usually once every 2 months, at least. And I think that really helped so that everyone was on more of an even playing field in terms of like the relationships and the connections we were making with one another. But, you know, traveling like that isn't an option for, you know, a lot of people, especially if you have kids or other responsibilities at home. And it also can be, you know, expensive on behalf of the company. I'm not sure if I have, you know, really an idea of what the solution might be. I think it's going to take a lot of experimentation to iron out like the right way to do hybrid. And we're really just starting to see that. And I hope that, you know, companies are going to be able to find a way to structure hybrid in a way that, you know, doesn't disadvantage the employees outside of San Francisco, outside of New York, outside of Dublin, who, you know, are just as serious about their work, and just as talented, just, you know, aren't living in the same place and able to, like, you know, grab those coffees and beers and whatever, you know, with the company founders like the rest, like the in-office people can.
I'm so delighted to, Joanne, thanks a million for bringing that up, because it is such a great topic, and you're so right, Rhiannon, like this isn't being figured out and it's going to take time. So I think it's a conversation that for any of us that can, and it looks, I think we all can start the conversation, even if you don't know what it's about. You could say, hybrid, what's that about and how is it going to play out? And sometimes just having that chat with somebody, whether they're going into remote role, they're leading in remote, or they're leading a partially remote hybrid team, that it's about, I think, us being deliberate and being very aware of what the consequences might be. If anyone on the call is interested, we have a presentation just around that as a conversation starter around hybrid, and that is open source. So if you want to, grab it and use it, just give us a shout, and we'll make that available to you. Helen Walsh has a question for you, Rhiannon. So I'm just going to invite Helen to ask you.
Thanks a million. Hi, Rhiannon.
Hi.
Rhiannon, I'm from a company called Employ Flex, and we're all about finding flexible work for people. So, in the last year, it's been great for us, because many companies who would have said, no, we can't do remote, it's not possible, have had no choice but to jump into it. And one thing, and it's been great because I've been able to prove to them, the caliber will increase, the quality and quantity will increase. But, a lot of them ask me tips on how to interview for remote roles, from their end, tips to ensure that people have actually thought through that remote is for them, genuinely thought through that they are a good fit for remote work. Have you any tips on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. For a lot of people, like you were just saying, this is a new experience, meeting people and only interacting with them virtually, and then, making a hiring decision based on that. I think that's challenging for a lot of people who are, used to, grabbing a coffee with someone and being able to shake hands and, do that in person. I think in terms of tips for the interview process, it's good to make sure that you're very explicit upfront about what the expectations are for the process, before the potential employee, even gets to their first phone call, right? So, if you have a recruiter on your team, making sure they spell out, the first call is going to be with X person, and, this is their title and their role and what they do within the organization. This is, these are the sorts of questions they're going to be asking, and this is where the interview is going to take place. And also clarifying things like whether or not it will be an audio or video interview, so that, the person can prepare accordingly and really, come and be their best self and feel confident. So making sure you have all of that information detailed out for them, I think will allow the person to perform at their best throughout the process. I think there have been, all kinds of situations since switching to remote work where there hasn't been a lot of clarity on where the call will take place, whether it's going to be a phone call or a Zoom meeting or Google Hangs, or, making sure the person has the right link ahead of time. And, that can cause a lot of stress and anxiety on behalf of the candidate. So again, being perfectly clear right up front about, what the whole process is going to be like, and making sure they have those details and links and everything else is super important. And I think it's just good to find ways to make the person feel comfortable. Like maybe you could even make it more like you're scheduling a virtual coffee, where you schedule it at a certain time of day, and you come with a coffee in hand. Or I've even heard about some coffees, or some companies rather, literally delivering like, coffee or something to the candidate to share during that meeting time. So little touches like that can make it more personal, I think. But really at the end of the day, you're just connecting with another person, whether it's virtually or in the real world. It's fundamentally the same kind of experience of getting to know someone before coming to a hiring decision.
Isn't that just such an absolutely lovely touch? And it's amazing the amount of people I've spoken to who even haven't been successful, but with companies who have gotten their processes really, they're well structured around this. And they said that they left feeling that they were valued in that process, even though they didn't land the job. And I think that that's so smart from a talent perspective. And Helen, I'm sure you'd agree with this, that then that candidate, you know, maybe a little bit down the road when they have more of the experience that's required, will still consider that company, which is so key. I hope that was of some help, Helen.
Thanks a million. Yeah, thanks, Rhiannon.
Yeah,
And thanks
absolutely.
so
And I
much,
love what
Chief.
you're doing. I'm absolutely going to check out your company after this.
They're so amazing, Rhiannon. I can't say enough good about them. And so many people within the Grow Remote community would speak very highly of the work you've done in EmployFlex as well, because you've actually placed some people. So that's more than amazing. And just as speaking in this area, again, something that has come up that I've learned in the last year is self-awareness is a critical skill that's been looked for by HR managers and people ops in remote teams. Because and by the way, who of us start out in life with self-awareness? This is a skill that you gain and you work on, and that we'll all be working on until the day that we shuffle away. So don't feel like you're not there or you can never be there. It can be gained, absolutely. So some level of self-awareness gives your team and your management a good sense that if there's any challenges, that they can be worked on and communicated. And you were just talking about it earlier on about writing as communication and writing as core skills. Like those kind of basic building blocks, and again, they can be developed and worked on. Like I do hear people sometimes say, I'm not creative, and I used to say that of myself as well, and now I know better. We're all creative on some level, but it can be developed. And sometimes you don't need to be as creative as we don't need to be the next Banksy or Picasso, but there's some level of creativity there. So if you could work on those writing skills, I think that's a huge benefit as well.
That writing skills are really just going to be the biggest advantage for anyone who wants to work remotely or wants to work in tech, going into this new decade and this new age of work. I really attribute my career growth to my ability to write and communicate well. In my book, I sort of detail this story. I had a very untraditional experience, sort of getting my start in my career. I dropped out of high school early, tried doing college. It didn't really work out for me. And, through my sort of ability to write and communicate well, I was able to, take on small gigs in the tech space in LA where I was living at the time, and sort of grow and build from there. And I think one thing that, people who hired me really appreciated was my ability to, communicate clearly and write well. And, those were fundamental pieces of all of the jobs I ended up doing. So if you have those talents, continuing to hone them and, really bringing those things up during an interview process is huge, I think.
Absolutely. And I know that there were people who have some natural talent there. And like you say, it's honed. And I have met plenty of people who said that it was like banging their head off a wall trying to write. But once there was a certain amount of confidence and experience in different areas, the writing was that bit easier. So, don't feel like, oh, I absolutely couldn't. I used to feel like that with languages, and I can actually speak a bit of Spanish now. So, there's hope for us all. Rhiannon, actually, just what Helen brought up there, I'd love to look at that from the other perspective, from the interviewee. Is there a particular piece of advice that you might have for somebody who's interviewing remotely?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that one of the key things when going into an interview, just like you're interviewing for any other job, is to do like a lot of research on the company that, will potentially be hiring you. Understand their sort of brand values and their mission, and come prepared with, a story about how you can personally connect and relate to that mission. I think that's really powerful. Like I've been on both sides of this so many times. I've interviewed people so many times, and I've been interviewed. And at the end of the day, it comes down to telling a compelling story, and finding ways to just genuinely connect person to person with whoever's on the opposite side of the screen. And, sometimes that's hard as an interviewee, because oftentimes we'll get interviewers who are a little more dry, and they'll sort of just be running down a list of questions, and it's harder to form a personal connection. But just do some research on the person who you're going to be talking to. Look them up on Twitter, look them up on LinkedIn, and find points of commonalities where you can sort of connect on an individual level as well, because I think that's what'll really help you stand out, and will make the person on the other side of the screen feel comfortable too, because it's about both you feeling comfortable and excited about the opportunity, and them feeling comfortable talking to you and excited at the possibility of working with you. So, doing that research ahead of time, and, finding those commonalities can lead to a big win, I think, if you're interviewing for a role.
I love you bringing
Rose?
that up, because yes.
Sorry, this is Helen again. Can I add one thing into that? Because
Yeah.
I had a candidate just interview last week for a remote role, and there was technical hitches, and like the camera didn't work and all of this. And then after the fact, I was getting feedback from the client, and they told me it was all intentional to see how that person would react to technical hitches. And I thought, whoa, yeah.
Wow.
So that was a new one for me. So I just thought, you know what? They just want to make sure you're calm and composed and no problem at all. Let's resume, and without the camera. So I thought that was a good little nugget. Sorry for jumping in there.
Helen.
That's fascinating. I have kind of mixed feelings about that, just because I feel like, the interview experience, no
enough,
matter no matter how confident or experienced you are, if you're interviewing for a job you really want, it's, there's a lot of anxiety that goes into that, and, having technical difficulties on top of that just adds another layer. So that's fascinating that they thought to do that.
I'm telling you, you'll learn some really interesting insights. Helen, thanks so much for sharing that with us, because I think it's those key pieces that you might know about. And then when it happens to you, because like you say, it's a stressful thing to do, is to go through an interview process no matter what. I love what you were saying there, Rhiannon, about like the research piece, and getting a sense of what the culture and the and the mission of a company is, because we've had two people in particular who've come and spoken to the Grow Remote community as well. So we have Rebecca Williams, who heard about Automatic through Grow Remote chapter, who is now with Automatic. And it was her second round of applying for a role within the company, when she had done that deep research, down to the point where she was like, totally vibing with all these blogs written by the person who was actually interviewing her. And they started like going on talking about topics that they both had in common. And then with another chap, Mick Mahady, who works with Buffer. And again, Mick had been freelancing, had heard about Buffer and learned about remote working and thought, this is awesome. Kind of threw his hat in the ring, as we say here in Ireland, just went for it, but wasn't really fully prepared. And it was in the second run then where he had gotten deeply involved in the Buffer online community, had been seen to be very, very helpful to others, really deeply understood what Buffer was about. And then by the time he came to interview for the second time, the team in Buffer knew this guy is serious and he gets who we are. And they're both in roles that they absolutely love. So yeah, I think that's such a key piece there. And a few other little, I know I have to say, I don't know like if this is ridiculous, but some of the HR managers have said to us, like sometimes there is kind of basic mistakes made. So running through, making sure, okay, short of where they're actually trying to see how you do under pressure, like Helen has just said, but making sure that you've tested out the platform. So if you've never used Zoom before, but you're suddenly being welcomed to use Zoom for an interview, give it a shot, set up a call with somebody here in the Grow Remote community, or, like have a look at your background. We've seen some of those really unfortunate situations of something's in the background and it doesn't go down well. And, so, and again, like that's one of those things about having, those mentors, having those communities, those people to bounce ideas off. Or even, and again, it's slightly different, but we've had somebody who managed to land a job because they gained experience using Slack by getting involved in the community. So, kicking the tires, getting involved, doing some volunteering, that can all help towards, getting those skills that you need that really shine once you hit that interview process.
Absolutely. I think that's huge. And I think to add on to all of these really amazing points about, being involved in the community, talking on social media with people who are leaders at the companies you want to work for, engaging with their blogs and the content they put out, and putting out similar content of your own, and starting to get on their radar, like you were saying, I think can be so helpful. I know Haley Griffiths at Buffer also, who's now their head of PR. I featured her in the book, and that was part of her story as well. When she was, interviewing for her job at Buffer in 2013, she was already, engaging with them on social media. Prior to that, she was super familiar with their open culture blog, and just really resonated with that mission and was able to tell that story really well. And she ended up, taking over that blog and running it for them, and started in a lower level role and is now their head of PR, like I said. So she's had a really amazing career trajectory. But outside of that too, I think an amazing thing you can do if you have the time and resources available is to understand what kind of role you want and what kind of company you want to work for, and then create a proof of concept around that to show them that you are highly competent and capable of doing that job. So one example, in 2012 I started after dropping out of high school and dropping out of community college and having this really rough time of it in my early years. I knew I wanted to work in tech, and what I did was I started my own online business. I started a community blog that I monetized through advertising, where I brought together a team of 50 plus writers all over the world. And, we were producing and publishing content, very long form, high quality, well-researched content every day. Articles by and for women on a variety of topics. And I was able to grow that, get our articles features and backlinks in huge publications like Washington Post, Huffington Post, Time, The Atlantic, Refinery 29, and really grow that audience to 10 to 20,000 visitors a day. And this was really my first foray into doing any kind of digital project. And I used the success of that as a proof of concept to get a higher level job in tech, and then started to learn from my mentors there, professionally, and ultimately that led to opening my consultancy business in 2017. So I think that if you're able to create a proof of concept relevant to the sort of job that you want to be doing, that makes a huge difference in the interview process, and just looking at your career as a whole, what that can do for you.
I love that. That's so inspiring. And over the years, like meeting other people who have, maybe not had the easiest starts, but finding ways through. And also so that I think that idea of proof of concept, showing what your skills are. And if anybody's at that stage where they're really not sure how they would even do that, again, come chat to us. We'll figure stuff like that out together. I recognize we're just getting up near on the hour. So Rhiannon, two things. Where can people find out more about you? Where would you have them connect with you online? And maybe you might have something you'd like to leave us with as we're finishing up.
Yeah, of course. I mean, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the questions and sort of getting to know the Grow Remote community. I am in the Grow Remote Slack. So if anyone has questions or wants to talk more about any of these topics, feel free to Slack me there. You can also find me on Twitter, which is where I'm most active, I'd say. So my Twitter is at Rhiannon_IO. I'll actually post it in the chat as well. If anyone wants to follow me there, and I tend to be quite responsive there as well. And if anyone is interested in my book, it's available right now in a physical paperback copy or ebook. The ebook is $2.99 right now. And you can find out more information about it at remoteworkera.com. And I do sell it through Amazon. So remoteworkera.com has all kinds of information about me and the book itself, and what sort of content is included, and a link to the Amazon page. So would be super honored if you're interested in sort of starting or growing on your remote path. If you check it out, I think that the frameworks I've defined could be super helpful. And yeah, thank you again, Rose. This was such a pleasure.
Rhiannon, thanks so very much. You've been so kind with your time. It's been lovely, like you said, getting to know you. I think again, hearing people's stories, but also like what you've learned from everybody else's story as well has been absolutely amazing. So hopefully we'll have you back at some stage. Hopefully we'll see everybody at some of our events. We actually have our next jobs club next week. If you go to growremote.ie, you'll see the events link there for some of the stuff that's coming up and for the virtual coffees and whatnot. And everybody, I hope you have a great week and we'll talk to you all soon. Take care. Bye.
Guys.